So, I don't know if any of you guys saw in the new Black Adam movie. If you saw at the end, spoiler alert, it showed a small clip of Superman, and we just saw on Instagram that Henry Cavill posted that he will be officially returning to Superman. There's a new crew in Warner Brothers, and they would love to have Henry Cavill back. You're a diehard Superman fan. What I just want to see what you think about this and what your thoughts on this moving forward with there being future Superman films. Like, do you have any hopes for this?
Well, I don't know if I'd say I'm a diehard Superman fan. Let's just say I consider myself someone who is a big fan of the idea of Superman. It's the first superhero I remember as a kid growing up in the 70s and 80s. I actually have a picture here of me as a kid.
Hmm.
That was probably around 1980 or so. So yeah, I've been a fan of Superman for a really long time. I don't know if I'm a diehard fan. I mean, what do you consider a diehard fan? Someone who loves the movie, someone who loves the comics. I've never been in love with the comics. I was more of a Marvel Comics guy, even though I was sort of in love with the character of Superman. And I knew Superman because I saw him sort of everywhere. Growing up, he was sort of a ubiquitous part of the culture. But it was really the 1978 Superman film that I fell in love with the character. And when I began many years later in the mid late 80s collecting comics. DC Comics never really caught my imagination at first. I was more of a Marvel guy, but I always still maintained a lot of affection for the character of Superman and really hoped going forward that they would build upon at least the first two movies, which were, especially the first one, but the second one as well, were decent quality. It was a decent film. Superman 3 and 4 were pretty much terrible. And Superman didn't really come back around until 2006 with the release of Superman Returns. And then, of course, Man of Steel, I think that was 2013. Do I have hope for the future Superman films? Not a lot. I had invested a lot of hope in the 2006 film and the 2013 film. Both had elements that were very good, but overall as a film, I think they both fell short of expectations, and I think that's reflected not only in the reviews, people's overall opinions of them, but in the box office as well. Although some people absolutely love the Henry Cavill, the Man of Steel film, and his appearances in Batman versus Superman, the Justice League. I'm a fan of the Henry Cavill character, the Superman. I think he's a great actor for the role. But the films, Man of Steel, Batman, Superman, I was not a big fan of those films.
Why don't we start from the very beginning? Like, what is your opinion on Man of Steel? Like, what are the pros and cons about that specific movie?
I think beginning with the pros, I think the movie is, from a visual standpoint, is beautiful. The cinematography is fantastic. They take the sort of epic nature of Superman seriously, and the movie had a lot of epic nature to it, some gravity. As much as I love the John Williams score, and I think it's amazing, and I wouldn't hurt my feelings if someone continued to use that in the films, but I think trying to give it a fresh identity. I think the Hans Zimmer score for that film was excellent as well. And I think Henry Cavill, given the material, is a great Superman. He's definitely got the physicality, the look. It's hard to know what the level of charm that he has for the role. I think in many ways he embodies Superman. I certainly hope he continues. I'm gratified to hear that he's going to continue to play Superman in upcoming DC projects. In terms of the cons, Superman is an aspirational character, a hopeful character, and there's very little in the way of hope, charm, and likability to the film. It's filmed with this sort of a bluish gray filter, gives it kind of a darker feel. Of course, that's only amplified in the Batman versus Superman and later the Justice League movies. And that's part of Zack Snyder's particular style of filming. I don't think it fits the character of Superman particularly well.
How so?
Oh, it's just this the story is more than just simply him growing up on Earth, arriving on Earth, learning to deal with humanity and the threat from Return of the Kryptonians. There's this whole thing about the Codex, the future of Kryptonian civilization, and turning Earth into a new Krypton, all of the genetic material for the future of Krypton, and it has just layers of complication in it that I think are unnecessary. Partially the fault of David S. Goyer, who's the writer, who I'm not a fan of at all. I think he doesn't get the character of Superman. At the least, he's written a few comics. Again, a darker, more serious Superman, which is what they were going for in the wake of the Christopher Nolan films, which took a dark and realistic tone with the Dark Knight trilogy. But I don't think that fits well with Superman. I think you can still ask the questions about how does Superman fit in a more cynical contemporary world that we have today and ask all these sort of serious questions. I don't think the overall tone of the film meshes well with the character of Superman.
I see what you mean. Now, going back to what you said about the soundtrack in the post-credit scene with Black Adam. Remember when I showed it to you? It sounded very similar to the John Williams theme. Do you think they're gonna go back to that, or maintain the Hans Zimmer soundtrack, or maybe have a mix of both? What do you think about that?
I think it was a nice touch to add the sort of melody of the Superman march from John Williams' original soundtrack for the 1978 film. I think it was a nice touch, and people identify with it so much. As soon as you hear it, you know it's Superman. So when Superman makes this cameo at the end of Black Adam, he sort of emerges from the shadows, and you hear the music. What's so great about John Williams' music is it's not only immediately identifiable, but it's sort of stirring, and as soon as you hear it, you know you get excited. It's so synonymous with the character; it's hard to separate the two. So I think it was a nice choice as far as going forward. It wouldn't hurt my feelings if they used that same soundtrack the way that Superman Returns did. They just sort of tweaked it slightly for that film. But the Hans Zimmer soundtrack was great as well, and I'm sure they can find ways to keep elements of both going forward.
You mentioned briefly something about Batman versus Superman. What are your thoughts on that movie? Again, with the pros and cons, actors wise, story wise, writing wise, whatever.
I'm not a fan of that film. I think everything to do with Doomsday was part of the problem is that modern superhero films are extravaganzas and writers, there's no one screenwriter or a small team of screenwriters. I mean, everyone from the studio, all the corporate people have their hands in the writing of the script and what has to be in the film, elements that they want to see in the film. And usually those, revolve around making money and big, huge action set pieces and things like that. So in terms of casting, I forget the actor's name, but the guy who played Lex Luthor, I thought was an awful choice, in my opinion. I thought the whole Doomsday thing and the whole Death of Superman was way too soon. I think they should have had a Man of Steel 2, like a sequel to that, before they jumped into a Justice League movie the way they did with that film. Again, and the movie has such dark tone. I mean, much more dark than Man of Steel, and it takes this super serious tone, Superman's place in the world and how people, what do you do when you basically have a walking, talking nuclear bomb walking around that can just destroy the entire planet if he chose to? How does the world respond to that? The movie just has such a dark and just oppressive tone to it. Having said all that, the one thing I did like about the movie was Ben Affleck's Batman. I remember when he was announced, everyone's like, oh no, not Ben Affleck. I think he probably did the best of any on-screen Batman because he gets the physicality of it far more, in my opinion, than Christian Bale or Michael Keaton or what's the new guy, Tom.
The one from The Batman, are you talking
Yeah,
about?
the new
Yeah.
Batman film. But I thought Affleck basically they took a page out of the Dark Knight Returns graphic novel by Frank Miller from 1986, where you have this Batman coming out of retirement when Gotham has gotten really dark, and he is older and cynical, embittered, and so he's comes back a little darker, a little angrier, and taking more of a brutal approach to things. And I think the Batman that they depicted there was pretty well done. And I think Ben Affleck did a really fine job. And I wish I could see him in his own Batman film. I wish there would have been time for that. But I liked him in that movie. Aside from that, didn't like much about it. I mean, the Superman versus Batman fight that was taken right out of the Dark Knight Returns comic. Felt like the film was kind of built around that whole idea, just sort of how do we get this really great scene. They had a few ideas in mind for what they wanted to see on screen and present to the audience, and then they kind of built a story or a script around those things and say, okay, we got to have the Batman versus Superman, we got to have Doomsday, we got to have Lex Luthor, we got to have the death of Superman, and it all has to work together to tie into the Justice League film. Again, too much, too many people involved in the crafting of the story. It's just kind of a mess, in my opinion.
What is the ideal type of actor that should play Superman, like represent him, all that?
We already had that, and that was Christopher Reeve. Christopher Reeve defined the role of Superman and Clark Kent in the 1978 film. No one's done it better since. That's not a knock on Henry Cavill. I think he is an excellent Superman. I think he checks a lot of the boxes. But the Superman that I knew growing up, the Boy Scout, the one who's always aspiring to do good, the one that's, often seen as a sort of a metaphor for Christ. Christopher even embodied that. He had the charm and simplicity and likability to him. I haven't seen much of that. I think Brandon Routh did a fine job, but the problem with the 2006 film is it's essentially it goes so far toward nostalgia because of the director Bryan Singer's affection for the original two films. He goes too far in the direction of nostalgia and trying to sort of copy and follow up with that, which Superman Returns is supposed to be like a direct sequel to Superman 2. They got an actor that looks a lot like, and Brandon Routh is essentially a reflection. Brandon Routh is essentially copying the Christopher Reeve Superman. So to me, Christopher Reeve was the ideal. That doesn't necessarily mean Henry Cavill needs a copy. He's been given very poor writing and stories to deal with. We don't get enough of it. The first film is filled with where you just get to know the character himself and get a sense of who he is. And I think a lighter tone would serve the character of Superman in a film far greater than this dark, heavy tone that the DC films are filled with. So
You're absolutely right. So speaking of dark, heavy tone and terrible writing, there's a movie called Brightburn that came out a few years ago. It's about like what if Superman was evil and what if he actually chose to do exactly what you said, which was like a walking nuclear bomb that could burn the entire Earth. That's what the movie was about. I've heard you talk about your disapproval of that movie. What do you want to talk about that?
Well, I didn't see the movie all the way through. I saw a bunch of clips of it and understood what the concept was. And that had been done before, and I think in a couple other comics. The Superman-like character, someone who comes to Earth, raised by parents on Earth in some sort of middle America town, except instead of being honest, forthright, boy grows up with sort of a sinister side of him. And, what would happen if Superman turned out bad? It's a weird choice. I don't get the appeal of it to spend an entire film to say, oh, what if Superman was actually bad and he killed everyone around him, burnt down Smallville and murdered all the people he grew up with, his classmates, his teachers, his parents. I just think it's perverse in my mind.
When you use the word perverse, is it like saying that is the whole idea of Superman killing innocent people is completely inappropriate, that should not be around?
It has to do with my personal feelings about what constitutes a good film. I mean, if you want to say that that's a good basis for a horror film, okay, I don't really see the appeal of it, and that's just my opinion. I don't think a film basically asking this question of what if Superman was bad, and that's your whole shtick for the whole movie is okay. So now instead of being a good guy, grows up and fights for truth, justice, the American way, and saves people and fights the bad guys. Instead, he's this twisted, evil guy who kills and murders people around him using his superpowers. I suppose it's kind of an interesting question to ponder. I'm not sure it's worth making an entire film about.
There's a clip I have ready, and I just wanted to see if you would like to criticize what you see. It's pretty graphic, it's gory, but would you like to see that?
Sure.
All right. After everything you've just said, what do you think of that? Do you think that is moral? Do you think that is right?
It's part of a perverse element in our culture that wants to twist everything that is good and true and beautiful in our culture. And we look at something like Superman, who represents truth and justice, the American way, and all these sorts of things, someone who's honest. And then we say, well, what if he was really bad? And so that's sort of where we are as a culture. We're taking all of these good and wonderful things that's part of our creative element of our culture, uniquely American mythology, superheroes, and let's take it and reverse it and see what happens if we turn everything, all of his good qualities, bad. Instead of being honest, he's dishonest, and instead of being good, he's evil. Well adjusted, he's a sociopath. Instead of trying to save lives, he tries to murder people. I mean, it's a horror movie. Instead of trying to create something new and interesting or building upon the good things that have already been done, we're just taking like, what if we turn it and twist it and see what if he was bad, what if he was evil, what if he did evil, horrible things, and that's what all of this new, these Amazon superhero shows, The Boys, it's all the same question as, let's explore how depraved and evil someone can go through the medium of superheroes, which are specifically designed to demonstrate heroism. And there were, if you want to see like how bad people were, well, you had supervillains for that. But now we're just going to say, it's, I guess, part of who we are as a culture now is we're so cynical or so down on the idea or have so little faith in society and that we prefer the sort of dark, evil, twisted element that's reflected in what we consume as a culture. And some of it's good quality, some of it has good writing, but again, the content is quite dark, quite twisted. You have Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones, and all these things are exploring sort of the worst of human nature and people. And to me, that just gets wearisome. Walking Dead is another one. I'm just weary of it, and I don't think it's very interesting. And I think having a character, someone who really is as good as he's advertised. I mean, it's why the Marvel films do so well. The original, the phase 1 through 3, ended with the Infinity War, and why these characters? Because they are basically good. Films do take a lighter tone. In Captain America, even though I think the version that's on the film is a really not particularly interesting but very vanilla sort of character, but he's good and he's represents sort of like who you want in a Captain America, someone who's good and true and honest and stands up for the weak, has the courage to stand up against evil even at the risk of his own life, against terrible odds, all of those things. And they still find ways to explore, tough questions about what it means to have superpowers or have a superpower organization and the earth and stuff. But the films are more an exploration of what makes us good. What is a hero, and what does that look like in our culture, instead of trying to ask and bring us down to the most base level of our society. I think we've just swung so far in the other direction. I don't think we necessarily believe that a superhero like Superman can exist in the way that he used to exist. And so he has to be this darker reflection. And so, but I think hopefully the writers will see past that and realize that you don't have to have some cheesy bubblegum square walking around that doesn't get anything and doesn't understand anything. And I think you can make an interesting Superman character. Hopefully that the writers, and they'll depict him in a way that is more aspirational, that is more aimed at what it means to be a hero. I'm rambling. Sorry.
If you were going to direct a Superman movie, how exactly would you do it?
I think I tried to narrow the vision of the character and sort of bring it back to the character that's always existed in the comic books, make it as non-political as possible. I think you can ask tough questions about, what does it mean to have a character like someone with Superman's power walking around? But I think they're more interesting questions. Some people and some writers find it difficult, like, well, Superman's so powerful, he can just defeat anybody. How does that make an interesting story? Well, that just to me reflects a lack of imagination, because Superman, being as powerful as he is, he has to make all sorts of choices about how he uses his power, how measured he is, and how he uses power. And, what situations does he try to save everything? How much of, humanity's work should he take on for himself? To answer your question, I think I'd simplify it. I think I'd try to go back to the sort of elements, the character that everyone is familiar with, the more Boy Scout type of character that has a great deal of charm and likability, and contrast that with the cynicism, the sort of darker tone of the world today and all of the problems and difficulties. The 70s were a very cynical time. America was in a serious economic recession. People had become very cynical. So the whole idea of something like Superman seemed really out of place and out of step with the times, that it would just be seen as cheesy and hokey and just didn't fit the times. And it was a huge hit. People found it was refreshing, and they loved seeing this heroic character look at the cynicism and the immorality, the sort of crumbling, decaying society, and how he sort of walks into that and redeems it in a lot of ways. And I think that could be just as interesting of a story today than it was in the late 70s. And I think in terms of other elements, I think I'd decomplicate the plot of the film. And once I'd established in a film or two about who the character is and what he's about, then, then you move into Justice League and having cameos of the characters and things like that. And I think that's what Henry Cavill had hoped for from what I read in interviews, that before they jumped right into Batman v Superman and the Justice League, they hoped to have another film in which they could sort of explore and get to know the character a little bit, because you didn't really get to see it a lot in that first film. He ends at the movie killing Zod and written into a kind of a corner and put in situations that force him into decisions. And before we even get to know the character himself and explore who he is and how he interacts with the world, he's thrust right into these sort of the most difficult, ultimate dark questions and choices that a superhero can face right off the bat.
Is what you're saying is that a Superman movie should not be horrifically dark. It should be like heroic. It should be good. Superman should be the hero, not the villain.
I think there are elements of the original 1978 film that are worth repeating and emulating, but not simply for the sake of nostalgia or copying what that film did, which is what the 2006 Bryan Singer film did. When I think Christopher Reeve, he's smiling, he's got that little smirk, he's got that sort of charm, and he has this sort of disarming quality about him. The film should have a certain lightness to it. And I don't mean like lightness as in simplistic or shallow. I mean lightness in terms of when you watch it and you feel good and you're hopeful. And Superman is someone that you like to be near and close to. And Henry Cavill, I think, does a fine job. But just given the material, he's scowling so much of the film. Even as a child, the character is doing things like the father is so concerned with keeping his son secret that he won't let him save him from a tornado. And Clark goes along with that. He doesn't save him, lets his dad die. It's a weird film. They have him do that. They have him completely annihilate a city. It's killing presumably tens of thousands of people while fighting Zod.
Which is more than how many people were killed in Brightburn.
Yeah, and just to show me a total lack of conscientiousness. And I know the second film goes into explores some of the consequences of that, but I just think before we even get a sense of who he is, forcing him into these difficult, awful choices right off the bat. I just think it's a poor choice. I think you need to develop the character. Let's find out who this new Henry Cavill Superman is and what he's about and get a sense of who he is. And then going forward, you perhaps in a future film, maybe he's faced with some of these much more difficult cosmic sort of problems.
So to end this conversation, are you saying that the ideal Superman should be one who is not this dark caricature, but just the basic superhero who fights for truth and justice in the American way, not the other way around?
Look, I think you can still make a serious superhero film that asks serious questions about, what it means to ground the film to a certain degree. Because maybe we've seen, Marvel's taken this more lighthearted approach. That doesn't mean that Superman, you can still ask the tough questions without having a Superman who is constantly scowling and disappointed about the world, and everyone sees him as this evil sort of character. I mean, I've been pretty clear about it. I think that they need to go for a more optimistic take on Superman, a throwback to a more Boy Scout type of character. But again, that's why the original film, I think, for the time was so successful, is because they really want to see. I mean, people love Superman. I mean, even despite what you'll see on social media and people that want to see this dark, gritty take. I mean, that's with everything. That somehow that's going to be somehow in itself make it better. But what makes Superman great as a character is his optimism, his aspirational nature, and sort of people looking up to him, because people do, despite all of their cynicism, they want someone who, at the end of the day, is someone they can look up to, that's a role model that they trust will save the day in the end. And they want to put faith in someone like that. They want to trust someone like that. And that's why people, when they see trailers for the films, even if the film doesn't turn out to be that well, but the trailers, they look at them and they think, oh, that maybe this is it. They're so excited about the character. You see people cheering in theaters when these trailers come on, or when you see Henry Cavill return to Superman. And people did the same thing back in 1978. People loved that film. People cheered in the theaters because Superman was everything that we all wanted him to be. But, then again, maybe we won't see that type of Superman anymore. Maybe we get the Superman we deserve. Maybe that's the Zack Snyder version.
All right, well, I think that's a good place to end on. Thank you for chatting with me today. I think you've said some great things, and I agree with a lot of what you've said. So I think we're going to end it there. Thank you very much.